And now I'm going to ask each panel member to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start here with Skylar. I believe everyone with good intentions, but I think they spelled his name wrong.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
Oops,
Testing. Thank you. It's really an honor to be here. My name is Skylar Dorn. I'm on the autism spectrum. I first believe I was autistic in high school, but did not become comfortable with self-diagnosis until my late 20s. Since then, I joined the Autism Society, hoping to find other people like me. I became an avid volunteer, and now lead a monthly game night and am a member of our adult advisory committee. I also have the honor to speak on panels at our Integral Autism Conference and an amazing event called What I Wish My Parents Knew last year. One of my great passions is working to strengthen and grow our autistic community.
Thank you, Skylar. And Jane, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Jane. My pronouns are they or she. I'm just going to say this. I am very anxious, and sometimes just saying that I'm anxious helps. So just putting that out there. So I'm a 27-year-old autistic adult. I was diagnosed in my late teens after struggling with the transition to college. But even with a diagnosis, resources for autistic adults are scarce and difficult to access. So one of my proudest achievements is graduating from UW-Madison in 2022, in spite of these barriers. As I've worked toward new goals over the past year, I've been fortunate enough to find and contribute to a community of autistic adults via the Autism Society of South Central Wisconsin. So, hello.
So Candy, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Candy Wolfmeyer, and I have a husband who's neurodivergent and two children who are neurodivergent. And they're both, they're all uniquely different in the spectrum.
And Megan.
Hi, my name is Megan Houghton. I'm actually the development coordinator for the Autism Society of South Central Wisconsin. So I run a lot of our education and training programs. I do our Autism 101 programs. But more importantly, I am a single mom to two boys. They both have non-speaking autism, and they are ages 13 and 12.
Thanks, Megan. What's going to happen next is we have a list of questions that I'm going to select from and ask each panel member in turn to give their answer if it's appropriate. Of course, any panel member can pass if they don't want to address that particular question. If we have time at the end, we will, like all the other speakers, invite questions from the audience, either to myself or to panel members. So we're going to start with, and I'm going to use a question number because the panelists have been given these questions ahead of time. So I'm going to start out with question 1, which is, how did you find out that you or your loved one was on the autism spectrum? And we'll just go from Skylar all the way around.
I just remember finding out that I was not operating in the world the way other people were.
My psychiatrist first mentioned the possibility of me potentially being autistic when I was about 19, when I was struggling coming out of high school. But my brother was actually diagnosed quite young, but I just sort of never considered the possibility because his autism sort of presented quite differently to mine. And I do wish that I had been diagnosed younger, just because of, having access to resources and understanding myself better at an earlier age and being able to cope with, difficult things in life related to autism or not. But I do really appreciate the way that I have discovered myself at this, later stage in my life. I think it's provided me with insight that I might not have found out if I was diagnosed young. So
Thanks, Jane. Candy, can you address that question? How did you find out your children were on the autism spectrum?
My oldest, sorry. We're gonna go in the row of when they were diagnosed. My oldest, sorry, was 3 and 3 months, and she's communicatively and cognitively displaying differently from normal neurotypical. And so she was diagnosed when she was 3 and 3 months. And then my youngest, my youngest was diagnosed with ADHD at 4, super hyper. And then we're like, something's missing. And I go back, and then she was diagnosed with mood disorder. And then I'm like, we're still missing something. And she's diagnosed with autism at age 9. Her ADHD is so prevalent that it was hard to see the autistic displays, right? And then my husband was diagnosed genetically because all of us have genetic anomalies. And so we knew he was autistic, but he's genetically confirmed to be autistic.
Thanks, Candy. Megan?
Yes. So my older son actually had severe hypotonia when he was little. And so when he was around the age of 1, we started to pursue other doctors to find out why he couldn't crawl, he couldn't stand up, he couldn't, he wasn't walking. So that led us to a neurologist and a developmental pediatrician and a genetic specialist, and they started mentioning autism to us. He also was not speaking. He was nonverbal at the time. Back then, we couldn't get on a wait list until he was about 3. So it was kind of sitting and waiting and trying to figure out why he couldn't stand up in the meantime. And so then when he turned 3, we did pursue the autism evaluation, and he was diagnosed. With my younger son, he also had no communication as he was growing up, but I kept being told, well, his brother doesn't talk, so that's why he's not talking. Like, he's fine. That's just it. But when he turned 3, we started seeing a lot of sensory issues. I have a very clear memory of taking him to Target with me when my older son was in therapy, and I had to get milk, and he dropped to the floor covering his ears because the noise of the lights in the freezer section was just too much for him. And that's when I started pushing to have the autism evaluation for him as well. But they fought me on it quite a bit, but I knew what I was seeing. I had an older son with it. So eventually we got in, and he got diagnosed at 4.
Thanks, Megan. The next question I'm going to use is number 3. What is one thing you would like to tell teachers and or schools or the general public about autism? Skylar, do you want to comment on that, or Jane? I know Jane does.
yeah. So this is something that I've thought a lot about. So I'm going to get a little bit pedagogical here, but bear with me. Our last speaker actually mentioned this in her talk, which I really appreciated. But the things that can help autistic students can help all students. Accommodating autistic children in school is not important simply because they're autistic. It's important because they're students, and all students deserve access to education in a supportive environment. So when we consider how best to provide that, we should consider how non-autistic students might benefit from similar supports. When we do that, we stop thinking of autistic students as abnormal or special kids with abnormal or special needs, and begin thinking of them as students with educational needs. I was going to do an example, but I've got a lot to say, so that might take up a lot of time. But an issue that I have with the accommodation model is the meticulous preoccupation with proving that a student really needs the accommodation, because God forbid they use an iPad to take notes instead of paper and pen. I have yet to be convinced that the vast majority of accommodations should be gate kept, so that only the students with convincing enough documentation be granted access. If a non-disabled student says they would benefit from a support, why on earth would we not give them that support? Most justifications for gatekeeping I've heard only make sense in an educational system that prioritizes evaluation over learning. This is unfortunately the prevailing system. And in my opinion, I think we should be doing everything we can to change that. And I think this pursuit is particularly important for autistic kids because most evaluations have ableism baked into them. And it feels rather silly to play this sort of destined to fall short game of accommodations whack-a-mole when all kids would benefit from prioritizing learning over evaluation. It's basically universal design, but in education.
Thank you, Jane. Candy.
Oh, I am going to use an example. So I was, yay. So, we are way behind in the education system as far as how we approach a neurodiverse brain. But here's the thing. If we have an Apple phone and the education system thinks that everybody's an Apple, okay? And the neurodivergent kids are just an Apple that isn't functioning properly. And then that's not true. The autistic kid is an Android. It's a different operating system, has different apps, and opens everything differently. Now, I had an Apple a couple years ago, and that's all the phone I used. And then I went to an Android, and that's frustrating, because the Android is different. And we need to approach education knowing that these kiddos have a different operating system. They learn differently, they open differently, and their apps are differently. So that's, we test them on the same parameters as an Apple. They can't access those apps. They can't access them. So we need to change how we're approaching teaching our neurodivergent children.
And Megan.
I think for me, the biggest thing that I try to communicate to our schools is, every child is different. So on paper, my boys are only a year apart. They both have autism. They're both non-speaking. They have the same communication device. They live with me. On paper, they look like they would be so similar. But anything you would do with my older son, if you do that with my younger son, you're going to get completely opposite results and not always for the best. So I think that is something I've really tried to stress in our educational system is really looking at child-specific training, learning from teachers they've had before about them specifically, because I think we've encountered educators who have a lot of experience, and that's wonderful, but they don't know my kid. And there's a lot of specific things about my child that they need to know and understand to properly help him. So I think really focusing on each child as an individual and knowing that there's always more you can learn to better meet their needs is what I would stress to the education system.
Thanks, Megan. Skylar, did you want to add anything to that or not? Okay. The next question I have is, what has been your experience with bullying in your life or your kids' lives?
I don't know if I can answer this question very well, but in high school, I noticed that people were bullying their friends. I always thought bullying was a nice thing. And it turns out when you try to bully somebody that's like, oh, we're friends now, it doesn't work. So I don't know if I was just treated as kind of off limits or whatever, but bullying didn't seem to stick with me. It wasn't till after high school that I went, well, that wasn't very nice. And also could see a lot of ways that I ended up being a bully just because of really poor understanding of social economics.
So Jane?
That was really well said. And I was going to sort of say similar things, but you pretty much covered it.
So Candy?
We haven't really experienced bullying. However, I would like to make note that both my children knew something was different when they went into school, and we weren't afraid to talk about that or afraid to say, hey, this is but they're also very, very sweet girls. And people tend to gravitate towards them instead of being elusive towards them. And they tend to just they're not afraid to approach people when they want to, especially my youngest. She'll actually get right in your face. So
Megan?
Yeah, similarly, we haven't really experienced much with bullying either. It's very clear, it appears, that my children are different and, have speech devices. My older son used to have a walker, so when they were little, it was very apparent to their peers that something was different. So we started addressing it from a very early age. When my kids started kindergarten, I would go in every April and just talk about it and let the kids ask me questions. And so we're also in a very small school, which helps. So their peers have always had a very clear understanding. They've seen their speech devices, they know where their fidget toy, all those things. We have encountered more of the, offhand rude comments when we're out in public, like at a checkout line or, trying to grocery shop, things like that. But it just rolls off. If I have the time to say something and spread a little awareness and education, I will. But we just tend to not let those bother us anymore.
Megan, why don't you keep the microphone, because I'm going to go on to a question 5. As a parent or family member, what behaviors do you find challenging about those on the spectrum, and how do you handle it?
Well, I can only, speak for my own children. But my younger son is very driven by reactions. He gets reinforced with those in a lot of ways. And so he seeks those out. He doesn't always know how to initiate play with me, but he knows how to initiate responses from me. Yeah. So trying to navigate that has been a challenge because sometimes there is a safety component to it. He used to have pica. He doesn't really struggle that with anymore, but he knows if he grabs a paper towel and puts it up towards his mouth and looks at me, I'm going to have to respond. So knowing how to navigate that, so I'm not giving him a reaction that then reinforces him to do it again, because it's a game now, but still keeping him safe. But then other times he'll do something that's just funny, and I have to try not to laugh. Okay, if I laugh, you're just going to think this is a game and keep doing it. So that's been the hardest part for me.
Thanks. Candy, can you address that question?
Yeah, well, I'm the only one that can find anything in my house. So I'm joking. So my oldest daughter, the biggest thing that I have for her is her select muteness, especially during illnesses or social situations where she really wants to communicate, but she can't. She just does not have access to it. And for me to navigate that is kind of difficult as a person who verbally talks a lot. And for my husband and Leah, it's demand avoidance. My youngest daughter has pathological demand avoidance, and my husband has demand avoidance, which means they can't access or be able to do a demand that I require at that given time. And me being able to figure out when they're available to do this task or demand is difficult at times. Although I do have an understanding of why it is. And so that's helpful when you know exactly why they're doing this thing. It makes it a lot less challenging.
So now, Jane, I would like to ask you a question. As someone on the spectrum, what behaviors do you find challenging about people not on the spectrum, and how do you handle it?
Well, so my one behavior that I'll talk about right now, the one that I have in mind is rather invisible, and I would say that most neurotypical people don't even realize that they're doing it, or not doing it. But in social interactions between autistic and non-autistic people, especially high masking autistics, often perform a majority of the social and emotional labor. And what I mean by that is that autistic people are expected to change their behavior. For example, perform eye contact, exhibit particular body language and facial expressions, adopt non-autistic communication styles, refrain from stimming, obviously, or in particular ways that make other people uncomfortable. And we're expected to do this in order to facilitate communication. Neurotypical people are never expected to adapt to autistic styles of communication or patterns of behavior because they're often not even aware of what that means, and because they're not threatened with ostracization, social rejection, or professional and educational backlash if they don't adapt. Autistic people are expected or are threatened with these things. And so the burden of ensuring social cohesion between, the neurotypes rests on autistic shoulders. This is an immense amount of labor gone unnoticed that is extremely exhausting. And if we don't do it, we either face, are threatened with these things or are simply socially isolated. And the way I handle this has been trying to unmask in places that I feel most safe, where I don't feel as threatened, and slowly sort of like unmasking so that the people who I'm closest to sort of know and unmasked me more. And so, slowly sort of like distributing the work of but I would suggest, if you're interested in this, looking into what's called the double empathy problem sort of explores this idea.
Skylar, do you have some comments on that?
Yeah, just to build on what Jane said, and I'm sorry, my mind is just so blank. There's so many people looking at me.
That's fine. Do you want to? I have a couple of comments that I would like to make about what Jane has said. I remember someone explaining to me how everyone talks about how society makes accommodations for people with disabilities, autism, or whatever. But what they don't talk about is how many accommodations autistic people are making every single day to the people around them, and the people around them don't even know it's happening. So think about that. How much energy people on the autism spectrum have to put in to doing things the way society expects them to be doing it. Just like Jane said, it's a struggle to have to adapt to a society that was not built for you. So do you want to pass now, Skylar, or do you want to add something?
Yeah, no, to build on what both of you have said, I am acutely aware of all of the intersections to my interactions that will give people an opportunity to not listen to me, to throw out and disregard what I say. And I know it comes down to how I present myself, how I dress. I am very aware that if I show any signs of anger, that a lot of people will use that as an opportunity to disregard what I say. So the amount of energy that I end up putting into experiences like this are immense. I mean, it took me at least 4 days to prepare to be here today, and I anticipate being extremely worn out to the point of not being able to think or talk for probably the next 3 days just to be here with everybody today. And I do it because I think it's so important for our voices to be heard and for people to understand that this is what we look like, this is how we talk, this is how we interact.
Thanks, Skylar. I'm going to move on now to question number 7. Who or what provides you with support in your life? Skylar, do you want to go with that again?
Yeah, just to build on what I just said, a major thing that I do for myself, I'm single, I live alone. I operate a small business. I call it micro resiliency, which is just really building up my tolerance to events like this by taking care of myself in the best way possible. I had my clothes ready this morning. I had breakfast laid out. I had my backpack full of everything that I needed so that this morning wasn't fraught with decisions while I just try to get here and be available for everybody. And then just outside of that, the support that I found through the Autism Society of knowing people who think like you, of being able to go to a collective and to talk about issues that you have, and to have that collective answer back and say that we see you, we understand what you're saying, this is what we do. You get to pick and choose, what will work for you, what you'd like to try. That has just been immensely powerful and useful. It's a really amazing thing that we've created.
Jane, do you want to comment on that? Where does your support in your life come from?
I don't have anything particularly unique to say, but I definitely echo what Skylar is saying about having access to a community of like-minded people, or people who share autistic traits, or whatever. Not just and to discuss these things and talk about our experiences and relate to each other in that way, but also just to exist as myself without having to constantly think about it or modify it. Just to exist in a space where I, my communication style is very similar to the person I'm talking to, and information flows a lot, more easily, and I can express myself more fully because I know that the other person understands me or hears me, or is able to be on my level without either of us having to do a lot of labor, I don't know, but also just sort of typical stuff, keeping myself busy all the time, because otherwise I sort of fall into various negative patterns, staying social even when it's taxing, but just doing it in smaller ways. I don't know where I'm going with this, so I'm just gonna pass it on.
Thanks, Jane. Candy, can you address the question about who or what provides you support in your life?
It was very difficult early on, and we've lost most of our close friends because our lifestyle is just so different, and it's hard for people to adapt to that. But in the same sense, I have so many things that have been supportive, have been helpful. The Wiseman Center, especially genetics. I just love the Wiseman Genetics Department. And the Autism Society, knowing that we can go to a space that's helpful to my children to feel comfortable. And there's just resources out there. It takes a while to find them, and then I wish that it was a little bit more adaptable that way. And the therapists that work with my daughters are very helpful in trying to help me as well.
So Megan, who gives you support in your life?
Well, I will echo what you just said. It's hard keeping friendships going, especially as a single parent too. I basically never can leave my house. But we have a very supportive family that we moved back to live by, and they've been on this journey with us and have been learning alongside of us, and very open and accommodating to that. We've gotten a lot of support through our school district. So really forming a strong connection with our special education team, the boys as case managers. They feel more like family to us. They've supported us outside of school. Getting to know, when the boys were in early childhood and early intervention, getting to know those other parents. We've stayed really close friends and have supported each other as our kids have moved up the school system, when we can, rely on each other for IEP support and, conferences and transition times. They're going through it too in the same district with the same teachers, and That's been really helpful. And then, yeah, working with the Autism Society. I was a volunteer before, so just meeting other families at events has been, the parent group on Facebook has been really great as well.
Thanks, Megan. The next question I'm going to address is question number 9. Do you or your loved one have any other issues like ADHD and OCD? Skylar?
I was diagnosed with ADHD at a really young age, and I often find that it is more of a complication in life than autism, although I don't think that's been the case for the last year or so, maybe.
Yeah, I also have ADHD. I also, have, variously struggled with my mental health over the years, especially before being diagnosed and just simply not knowing what the hell is going on up in my brain. But it's funny because sometimes I can't tell if a behavior trait is from the autism or the ADHD, but other times it feels like I'm being pulled in opposite directions at the same time. With my ADHD and my autism. And I also have a chronic illness, which some of the symptoms sort of like overlap with my ADHD and autism symptoms. Like I get brain fog that very much exacerbates my executive dysfunction. And so I've had to develop a lot of tools and systems to keep chugging along. And it's a lifelong project. And I am lucky to have people around me who always have great suggestions and who have been through similar things and I'm not a very organized person, but one of my friends is incredibly organized and has systems for everything. And that has been a huge help. I'm just yapping. So
Candy, do your girls or you have ADHD and or OCD?
Alas, I'm completely neurotypical, genetically, and it's very sad. But the ADHD, my husband has ADHD, and both my girls have ADHD and autism. But my nephew has autism. Both my nephews have autism, and we have several family members. Also, my youngest niece is undiagnosed right now. So there's a lot of that in there. But I do have a genetic anomaly, which is probably passed on from my dad's side, we're thinking, because on dad's side, there's a lot of autism as well. And I say that I'm disappointed that I don't have some sort of prevalence in the ADHD or a neurodivergent community, because it would be easier for me to communicate with my children, to communicate with my husband. And to me, being a neurotypical is harder because my world is neurodivergence.
Thanks. Megan, can you address that question as to whether or not your sons have these other conditions?
So my sons have not formally been diagnosed with ADHD. Like I mentioned before, my older son has hypotonia, so he could not walk until he was about 6 years old. Now that he's a teenager, it doesn't really impact him as much. He gets a little winded. He's not a runner by any means. He also was diagnosed with an intellectual disability. That was through the school system when he hit middle school. So that's changed a little bit how we address his IEP educational goals. My younger son has epilepsy. That's new. That's been a fun development. We think it's been hormonally based because he's right around pre-puberty. So we think that's what triggered it. But more recently, he was diagnosed with PTSD from COVID. So not the illness itself, but from school shutting down, and we lost every person that meant anything to him except me, pretty much. He had a really hard time with that. And then when school eventually reopened, he had this compulsive need to check to see if his teachers were disappearing every hour, because that's what it felt like to him. So that has kind of taken over and been more prevalent almost than the autism the last couple of years. But I think he's slowly getting through it. So
Thanks, Megan. Now I'm going to move on to question 10 on your list, panelists. But first, I'm going to exercise a mom's privilege to talk about the special interests that my son has. My son, besides having a special interest in the donuts we had today, he is a mathematician. He became the first person that they ever knew of with full-blown autism to graduate from the UW-Madison. That happened back in 2005. And he is here today. He's sitting in the back of the room working on his fractal graphics issues. So being a mom, that is my son's special interest, is mathematics. So what I'm going to ask the panelists now, do you or your loved ones have an unusual ability or some accumulation of special knowledge that most other people who do not have? Like in my son's example, most other people don't do calculus problems for fun. Skylar.
My example for me is foraging. I took to foraging a few years ago, and it's just been an all-encompassing passion for me. I really love the intersection of health, exercise, nature, closeness to my food. I think this is something that so many people are looking for, and I find it encompassed in this one activity, and I just think that's crazy, and I can't get enough of it.
So my ADHD sort of affects my special interests. I don't love the phrase special interest, but I'll go with it because I don't have anything better. But I sort of like rapidly cycle through hobbies and interests just like constantly. And so I'll often like forget a lot of my accumulated knowledge by the time I get back to it like 3 months later. But one like enduring special interest is definitely politics, sociology, and just related topics. But one of in my cycle of interests and hobbies right now is following professional cycling. I watch a lot of it. Most might say too much, but it's fun. It's a vibe. So I enjoy it.
Candy, do your children have any special stuff that you want to share with us?
My youngest daughter, special interest is pregnancy. And it has been that since she was about 3. And she knows everything about pregnancy. If you have any questions, I can forward you to my daughter. Animals, people, but she really loves live birth and she wants to be a midwife. And my oldest daughter she can see a person once and she'll know you the next time she sees you. And it doesn't matter if it's 5 years, 10 years, she'll know you. And if you tell her your name, she'll know that too. 5, 10 years down the road. And my husband, he's very into politics right now as a special interest, but it cycles for him. But for my daughter, I really wish she would cycle out of pregnancy. But that's her interest, and I encourage her to go with her interests.
Sorry, I love that. So I would like to say, Nancy, prior to having children, I was a math major. So don't judge those of us who do calculus for fun. I'm right there too. I don't really know how to describe this. It's more maybe a special ability. But my younger son in the last couple of years has an amazing memory for like Pixar movies. And he uses that to communicate with me now. And he can remember a scene from Toy Story 2 and find it within 20 seconds. That's going to communicate something crazy to me. And it started during COVID. We talked about school shutting down. And the next morning, it was our first morning home. And he came out and he pulled up Finding Dory, and I was like, we never watched that movie. Like, what is going on? And he went right, if you're familiar with the movie, he went right to the scene where Dory starts yelling, we're in quarantine, we're in quarantine. And he played it for like an hour. And I was like, how do you know why do you know this? So that's when I started paying attention to it, and I realized he was using like Buzz Lightyear to say goodbye to me when I left. He pulled up a clip from Inside Out and asked me about divorce. Dad's leaving, which unfortunately we experienced. He's used it to make fun of my singing before. So it's just a really unique ability, I think, that he's found ways to communicate. And now he takes his own videos. So it's kind of like living with reality TV in my house, but he uses them then to ask for, people he wants to see. Or if we ate something at my mom's, well, he has a video of her pantry, so he'll pull it up and show me it. Or we drove past the pizza place on our way to Target 2 years ago, and he has a video. So now when he wants pizza, he pulls up the pizza place. So it's just crazy how he can remember all that and pull it up exactly when he needs it and communicate such deep thoughts to me through like Buzz Lightyear. But we're going with it and we love it. So
Thanks, Megan. I wanted especially to ask that question because since these people do think outside the box for lots of reasons, they are a real asset to society. I've had so much fun talking to Skylar about foraging. He showed me so many things that I had no clue. So he has this knowledge accumulated. And they've mentioned, like Candy, the whole pregnancy thing, it's kind of weird, but at the same time, she's got a knowledge base on that. And I've mentioned my son's mathematics. They've mentioned, I've heard this in a couple of conferences, that the math departments of universities are nothing but sheltered workshops for people on the spectrum. And also several of them mentioned cycling through different interests. Besides a long-term interest in math, my son has cycled through lots of different interests, starting with curved stairways. And one of the most unusual special interests that he developed was hairless dogs. He drove us nuts until we finally got him a Chinese crested puppy. There is nothing in the world as relentless as an autistic person who wants something. So now I'm going to move on to a question that's mostly for the people on the spectrum, but also for Candy. Megan, if you want to add something to this. Several of them have mentioned masking. How many people here know what masking is? Most of us, wonderful. But just as a small little definition, masking is acting like those around you to suppress your own autistic behaviors and also to make you look more neurotypical. Do you do a lot of masking when you are with other people? Skylar, do you do a lot of masking?
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier, that the amount of thought that I put into showing up in a situation like this so that I can be taken seriously and have my words heard is immense. There's a lot of things that I'm doing to not seem autistic. There's a lot of things I'm not doing to not seem autistic. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mask very, very heavily. Yeah, it's a complicated topic. Because everyone masks to a certain extent, autistic or not. But so it's and I want to decrease how much I mask, but it's very difficult to find the line, but also just gain the courage to do so, because there can be large consequences. For the longest time before I was diagnosed, I suffered from severe social anxiety, and providers, like therapists and social workers, would try and tell me to or like, that's not, this is just like a delusion, like this is like non-logical thinking. This isn't based in reality or whatever. This is, everything's going to be fine. But there are very real consequences in social interactions for not performing correctly. And I've experienced those consequences throughout my whole life, and I've been essentially trained to not act how I would normally act. So it's very difficult to stop masking because it's so like ingrained into me, just based on experience and like constant messaging, that how I act without masking is wrong or abnormal or deviant or, weird or, just any number of negative things. And so, it's been very difficult. But I have, like I said earlier, been trying to do it in, settings where I feel more safe. And it's a long road. And there's some situations where I, think that masking is, isn't actually that, it doesn't have a huge negative impact on me. And, I don't have an issue with masking, but, by and large, it has a rather negative effect on me. And I wish we lived in a world where that didn't happen to me over my life.
Thanks, Jane. Candy, do you want to talk about your daughter's use of masking?
They aren't encouraged to mask, especially in the home environment. I want them to have the availability to not mask because it is very, very draining. It is super draining to sit there and put on a mask all day long and then have to come home and do the same because your parents are annoyed by your behaviors. And I do not want that environment to be where they have to mask for me because I don't want them to. It's super draining. And my daughter, who's 16, sucks her thumb. And a lot of society would say, well, she shouldn't be sucking her thumb at 16. Well, that's a bunch of, it's dumb. It regulates her. It regulates her sensory system. It regulates her nervous system. And I am not going to stop her from sucking her thumb. And I don't care what somebody thinks about that. My other daughter masks all day long because she wants the approval of her peers. And I tell her all the time, I say, listen, they like you. And you don't want to be around somebody who doesn't like you for who you are. And they're autistic and they have a different operating system and they deserve to be able to operate on that operating system.
Thanks. Megan, do you have any comments on that?
I can't speak to it as well as they all did. I will just say, going off of Candy's side, I do believe school is very exhausting for my children as well, all day long, very demanding. And so we just try and embrace too, like free to be yourself at home, no matter what that looks like, whatever it takes. We try and focus on that as well.
Thanks, Megan. I would like to just tell you my favorite example of masking. I have a friend, very accomplished friend on the autism spectrum, who looked at me one day and said, Nancy, you have 17 whiskers in your mustache. I was just thrilled, privileged, except that she can't count very well, but she actually was not masking. She was not editing the stuff coming out of her mouth just so that I would feel that she was neurotypical. So if someone does something like that to you, whether you have a mustache or not, then be proud because they are relaxing with you. It's now about 11:25 and we're supposed to be done at 11:30. So at this point, I think we will take questions from the audience to either myself or panel members. And I think someone's going to be running around with a microphone. What?
If I could just add to my
Oh,
answer
okay,
earlier.
yes, please.
I just wanted to say, the difference between masking in adolescence and my 20s, it was a very damaging act. I would always throw out my own personal needs in order to try and show up and present myself as the easiest person to get along with. One of my last memories before being diagnosed that just really sticks out to me is just going to have dinner with some friends and putting days of effort into thinking about what I'm going to say, jokes I'm going to tell, how I'm going to dress, and then getting there and continuing to be extremely harsh with myself, during my interactions, to be very careful about everything I say, and then leaving and chastising myself for for ways that I may not have said something right, or a joke I said that didn't get the reaction that I want, and that going on for days. And it was just so incredibly damaging and draining. So in adulthood, I do continue to mask. I try to make sure that it's something that aligns with my views and my goals. And I try to make sure it's something that I'm doing for myself. I don't have parents to oversee and protect me in all these cases. So it is something that I do have to do myself. And that's the difference between masking as a very damaging act and masking that I think I'll just stop there because I don't want to say that it's something that we're expected to do, but it is healthier than what I was doing at least.
Well, thanks, Skylar, for that addendum. So is there someone with the microphone here for if someone has questions? Oh, okay. I see a hand up way in the back there. Can you talk loud enough that we can hear it?
This question is for James specifically. Did you ever have a time where you needed to assemble, like, I guess, your Avengers team, I guess, your team that you could count on while going to UW-Madison, like a group of teachers, staff members and whatnot that were helpful towards your overall development and growth while you went and navigated through UW?
Not particularly. It took me like 8 years across 4 schools to finish my undergrad degree. And yeah, it was mostly a struggle. I had people on my team here and there, but I didn't have the support system I have now. Was largely, I largely created that after I graduated and like towards the end. Yeah, I wish I had, but I do know when in my first year at UW in 2019, I did some group therapy thing through UW Health, I don't know, whatever. And I asked like the school's health, student health, whatever. And I asked if there was like an autism support group or anything like that. And at the time they didn't have it, but they then added something like that. I don't know the details, but I do know that there are more options now than there were when I began. And also I could have, seeked resources out more, but yeah, sorry, I don't have a better answer.
All right. Thanks, Jane. Another question in the front here?
How do you, how the problem with the kids, for, using the AAC device, when you started, what age, and, how's it gotten better or progress or just your experience throughout the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love
Did everybody hear that question? Okay. Can you repeat that, Megan?
Oh, yes. I was just asked how our journey with AAC started, if it's changed, if we've made progress, and what that looked like, what age the kids were when we started to pursue other communication routes. So my children were about 3 or 4 when we started. And at that time, we started with text, so the little picture symbols. It was just very basic. They would hand me one and I would reinforce it. So if they were handing me, juice or milk, or they were very motivated by food. So that seemed like a great place to start back then. And then when they were around 4, we switched to a tablet, like an iPad with a program on it. They did all right with it. My older son has never really taken to it, even to today. He very much views it as work. It's very like I have to prompt him to use it. He's not spontaneously using it. So he's 13 now. But he knows what it's for. He knows that if he really needs something, he can make some basic requests on it. My younger son loved it. He used to babble on it nonstop, just pushing letters and pushing buttons and seeing what it would say and what it would do. So he's been on it since. We've switched programs once just to find one that was better for motor planning. So they're both on LAMP, Words for Life. Yeah, he loves it. He can type on it. He can make sentences now. He can, search for words. When they were around the age of 5, I started to embrace it, though. I think that's been the biggest difference. So we had a new speech therapist who just very point blank told me, like, why aren't you using visuals? And I was like, I don't know what that means. Why would I use a visual? Like, I had no idea where to start. So they came to my house and they were like, here's how you start implementing this. So we started labeling things. We started using visual schedules, visual calendars, breaking down how to brush your teeth, how to wash your hands, like visuals for those. And then I started talking to them on their talkers. So I have my own iPad with their communication program. So when I'm speaking to them, I'm typing it so they're seeing me model it. Because I'm the only one who talks in my house. That's just, I'm outnumbered. So once I started doing that, he started using it way more. I'm hopeful my older son will get there at some point, but for him, it's still very much just work. But that's okay. He knows it's there. We always have it accessible for him. And, if he really wants, goldfish bad enough, he will use it sometimes. So, we're getting there. But that's kind of how our progress has been with it.
Thanks, Megan. That was really helpful information, I think. Let's take 2 more questions. Another question from someone? I can't really see because of the lights very well. Okay, in the back there with your hand up. You, yeah, you.
So I'm an adult, ADD diagnosed around in my 30s, so because it's also considered a female problem. And I'm wondering if some research has been done. I'm thinking back to the first presentation of always the guys outnumbering the girls, and I'm wondering if anybody has looked into the ways that women or that girl students use masking as a tool to skew those percentages, so people think that boys are more prone than girls.
Okay, I just wanted to rephrase that question, I hope. You were wondering if the fact that women are probably better at masking than men, if that has influenced the number of people diagnosed, especially women, because they fly under the radar, basically. Did you have a particular panelist that you wanted to ask? Well, none of the panelists are researchers. Is there someone else in the audience who might?
I have a recommendation for a book that sort of covers this. It's not fully research oriented, but it does reference research. It's Unmasking Autism by Devin Price, I think is the author's last name. I highly recommend it. It is incredible for someone who's a woman and non-binary and autistic and has ADHD. It was very, very good.
Unmasking Autism is the book that she is recommending.
I just, having two girls on the spectrum and knowing that the main reason why it took so long to have my youngest diagnosed is because she's so efficient at masking. And this is why, definitely why women aren't diagnosed until they're in their late 20s, early 30s, because they are so good at masking. They're so good at maintaining a level of masking, but it also is inhibiting them and draining them. And so this is why we really, really need to focus on how we can get these younger women diagnosed, whether it be through genetics or through traditional things. And we need to tailor the diagnosis process better to fit a woman's brain.
Skylar, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I want to say that there's a systemic issue that we see with all the women in our society, that they are trained and taught from a very young age to mask, to present themselves. They're taught that men are more powerful, their opinions matter more, and that if you get hurt by this person who is stronger and bigger than you, that it's a fault of yours. And then beyond that, into autism, I've also found that a lot of women's traits and special interests will get considered a part of femininity, because we have a baseline disrespect for women and their interests and their passions, and we will oftentimes just toss it away as that's what women do. Women are all obsessed with sewing and 1850s crochet patterns, crap like that. Thank you.
That was a little longer than we had anticipated. I will be willing to stay around if anybody has questions for me. Are you willing also?
I'm
Yeah.
very open to more questions.
Okay, so we're going to call us a day now because it's 11:30, but okay, we'll take one more over there.
Difference in how people were treating you and before and after diagnosis they knew, because like I noticed with my own experience, I was diagnosed in 17, and then suddenly the expectations of me were actually higher because I was diagnosed. It was a sort of, what's happening now, fix it. Like I think I learned to mask to an extent as a child, but I wasn't aware of it. But then suddenly when I was diagnosed, my parents were kind of saying like, oh, okay, now you know what's wrong, like put in more work. And I was like, but I'm so tired. Do more. I wonder whether you had experience with that at all.
Let me repeat that question, I hope. You said that when you were diagnosed at the age of 17, your parents especially put more expectations on you because now you know why you're the way you are, and you were expected to fix it. In other words, to get more neurotypical. So does the panel have any experiences like that?
Definitely. That's my mind's a little bit of a jumble with an answer for that one, but yeah, absolutely. There's also the feeling that if you're able to describe something, that you're expected to have fixed it by now, when the description took me 2 years to come up with. And then there's things that I am not able to describe that I've also been thinking of for years and years, just trying to come up with a way to explain it to myself so that I can eventually do something about it. So yeah, it's absolutely been, I don't want to say absolutely been my experience. It's a little bit of a difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I definitely have had experience with that, and it's sort of like this a very strange combination of just expecting that I can't do anything once they learn I'm autistic, and like expecting it's basically like whatever is most convenient for the person, whether I should be expected to do something or whether, I don't know anything and therefore they should, have control or, whatever. So yeah, definitely resonates with me.
Well, I'd like to thank all the panelists today, and I would really like to thank the Wiseman Center and the Autism Society. And I wanted to add one more thing about support, which is what this woman who asked the question about being expected more of, what support looks like. And I think I can describe it with my son. My son's 45. He's still afraid of the sound of vacuum cleaners because it has bothered him for a very long time. Support, I sum it up with one little phrase. Support is not eye rolling. So if you are going to support someone, you will accept the fact that whatever is going on with them is real and deserves some kind of consideration, rather than saying, oh God, here comes the whole thing with the vacuum cleaners again. You do not do that. You support the person with their whatever their need is. In our son's case with the vacuum cleaners, we make sure we never turn on vacuum cleaners in our house without first telling him that we need to do it and giving him some sort of exit strategy that he picks out. We don't pick it out. And then if there's out in public, like a mall or something, and somebody gets out a vacuum cleaner, we facilitate his escape if he needs it. So with that, I'm going to stay around. I guess the panel members are, but we are supposed to end 11:30. So thank you all for hanging around a little extra time.